And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm host Benjamin Lee. Please join me and my guests on this exclusive interview. Now, tensions in the Middle East have reached a critical point following the assassination of senior Hamas and Hezbollah leaders. In response, Iran has vowed severe revenge, and the United States has deployed jets and warships to the region. The situation escalated further with an attack on a U.S. military base in Iraq, injuring several personnel. As the conflict threatens to expand, the potential for a wider regional war looms. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss these developments is Maciej Kozłowski, a former Polish ambassador to Israel. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So can we start with the most recent attack on the U.S. base in Iraq? How likely do you think that we might see further escalation in the region in that event?
Well, this happened already, and it doesn't mean an immediate raise of tension. I think the situation will depend on the scale of the retaliation Iran is preparing. Would it be a symbolic attack as it was on the 13th of April, or something more severe? And I think nobody knows exactly what Iran's plans are. There is a very active diplomacy going on around these developments. Jordanian foreign minister visited Tehran last Sunday. Yesterday, Shoigu, the former Russian defense minister and now the security chief, visited Iran. Probably they were discussing additional Russian help for Iran. So we don't know exactly what's going on in Tehran, and probably the decision is not taken yet on the scale, on the way how the Iran will retaliate, because that it will retaliate is certain.
All right, is that the reason why Israel is not striking back preemptively? Because we don't know how severe the attack will be it a symbolic one or one that actually has any substantial kind of damage?
Well, I think that no one in the region wants a full-scale war. Iran in particular is not interested. Iran has shown for the last many years that it's very pragmatic. The rhetoric one way and the actions the other way. So Iran, I think, is afraid of the direct confrontation with the US. So it is not certain if this attack on American base was sort of approved by Iran or it was some local militia which took initiative. We don't know that. But I don't think that Iran is ready for wider confrontation. It has to attack because it was humiliated. You know, the attack on the Iranian soul in the compound of the Revolutionary Guard is a humiliation for this formation. So they have to show, even for their political standing in Iran. But I don't think it will be as severe as some fear.
All right. You mentioned that Iran perhaps is not ready for any sort of wider confrontation. However, like you also mentioned, when it comes to rhetoric, Iran is quite strong on this front. Do you think it's done so more for internal consumption, or is there any other calculation that would cause them to have a kind of outsized rhetoric when it compares to their actions on the ground?
You know, in the Middle East, rhetoric is always one thing, the actions is the other thing. Look at Turkey. It had very strong rhetoric, even Erdogan's threatening direct involvement in Middle Eastern conflict. As we hear from American sources recently, Turkey is engaged in some diplomacy with Tehran to sort of lower the tensions. So the rhetoric is one thing, the action is the other thing. The problem is that this assassination of Hania and the tension which it caused stopped the talks in Cairo about the ceasefire in Gaza. And I think that the crucial element in this whole puzzle is Gaza. That means once the ceasefire in Gaza is reached, then the tension automatically will decrease.
Can you help us connect these dots together? Like you mentioned, if a ceasefire is achieved in Gaza, we can actually see a de-escalation and other fronts when it looks like the kind of boiling pot is already kind of boiling over.
Well, the problem is that we don't know what intentions of Israeli governments actually are. We know that it might be in the interest of Netanyahu, not in the interest of Israel, but in the interest of Netanyahu himself, to sort of prolong the war and keep this war on, I would say, certain level. Of course, I don't think Netanyahu is interested in the all-scale confrontation, because it will be devastating for Israel, it will be devastating for the whole region, and it will be devastating for him eventually. But keeping this conflict sort of on a boiling, but not too much, I think is in his interest, because all the talks about the ceasefire after this one ceasefire in November didn't materialize, and probably they didn't materialize because of the Netanyahu interests.
Right, like you said, a little bit of tension was diverted to the current development situation, and talks about ceasefire has lowered a little bit. How do you think that benefits? Like, why would that be in Netanyahu's interest to not come to the table to discuss the ceasefire?
Because once the ceasefire is reached, there will be a reckoning in Israel itself about the 7th of October, and there will be a talk about the elections. The government is losing support, and more people in Israel are demanding elections. This cannot be done during the war. So once the war is over, even if it is a ceasefire, I think that as a possibility that the election will be announced and probably Netanyahu lose control.
Right, and drawing the attention from the situation on the ground right now, I'm also wondering, with the global market already kind of jittery, what could broader economic impacts be if this conflict escalates or even kind of stay the way it is?
Sorry, I didn't follow. Could you repeat, please? I didn't follow you.
Sure, my apologies. So I'm wondering, with the global market already jittery right now, and we see like the U.S. Stock market already crashed, what is going to happen if just further escalation of tension, or even not further escalation, but the current level of escalation, will that destabilize the economy even further?
Of course. Every tension in the Middle East usually has an impact on the global economy. Oil is still a very important commodity, but I don't think that it will last. Of course, the full-scale war will be something totally different, but I think that usually, we have been seeing this conflict for many, many years. And usually after the time of tensions, situation was coming back to normal. In this region, normality means the exchange of fire, but on a very limited scale. And every agent is trying to keep in a certain boundaries. And probably that will happen this time again. We remembered this tension of April, and it sort of returned to normal. This all started with the evident mistake, the attack on the Druze village, Magjal Shams. It was a mistake. And then, the things developed. I hope that there will be an attack or any other action, and then the situation would come back to normal, and with the hope that finally America or the development in Israel itself will force Israeli government for a meaningful steps to end the Gaza conflict.
All right, and I would like to draw our attention also to Poland or even the broader Central Eastern European region and ask you what might be the impact of this Middle East war on this particular region.
Well, Europe is always affected with the situation in the Middle East, especially that if there is a war, the problem of refugees is happening. Remember what happened in the war in Syria with the millions of refugees, the tension in whole Europe, and the situation until now. We see what's going on in Britain right now. It is somehow connected with what's going on in the Middle East, although this guy who started, this attack was not Middle Eastern, was not Muslim, but it is not substantial for this kind of events, especially that the retaliation might take a form of an attack on Israeli interests abroad. Attack on Israeli embassy or assassination of an Israeli personality in Europe. And that would affect also Europe, not only Middle East.
All right, so we are looking at sort of a ripple effect that can still kind of impact this part of the world. Is there anything that we do have to keep an eye out on for the future development? What are some of your predictions that might happen? Are you leaning more towards things maybe simmering down, or do you see this thing having the possibility of taking another escalatory turn?
Of course, the problem is that with the war, there is always a factor which cannot be predicted. One rocket which gets a target and many people are killed, or some actions of some actors we do not predict. We should remember that in this situation now, there are not just two states, Israel and Iran, but you have all this militia. You have Houthis who have their own interest. Right. You have Hezbollah who has own interest. You have this Shiite militias in Iran who probably attacked this American base. So there is a lot of actors, and not all of them are fully controlled by anybody. So, the unpredictability of the situation is very high because of so many actors and so many interests, which sometimes are conflicting. Houthis are not always following the interests of Iran, as Hezbollah, which has its own interest in Lebanon, and so on and so on.
Right, like I mentioned, there's a lot of actor into this, and that's going to perhaps change the equation a bit with its unpredictability. Thank you so much for helping us breaking down this situation. In the meantime, guest has been Maciej Kozłowski, former Polish ambassador to Israel. Thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
And with that, we conclude this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.